Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 2. We're going to go ahead and get started. So when I first joined Grammarly as a developer advocate, the very first thing they asked me to do was write a piece of product documentation. So they wanted me to explain how to use the Grammarly Text Editor SDK with Electron. So just to get everybody on the same page, is anybody here familiar with the Grammarly Text Editor SDK? I saw one hand. Okay, so that's kind of what I was thinking. So to make sure you know what I'm talking about, the Grammarly Text Editor SDK allows you to add Grammarly's communication assistance to your apps. So with a few lines of code, you can display Grammarly's inline suggestions in your app. And who here is familiar with Electron? More people? Yeah. Okay. So Electron is a framework that allows you to build desktop apps using web technology like HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So a lot of popular desktop apps are built with Electron, apps like Zoom and Slack. So my team was planning to release support for using the SDK with Electron apps the following week, and they needed me to write the docs that would be released with that release. So I was vaguely familiar with the SDK because I'd explored it during my interview process, but I was not at all familiar with Electron at that time. So I had a lot to learn. So let me give you a little bit of background on me so you can kind of understand where my mindset was. So I started out my career as a software engineer at IBM, and I spent about 8 years there on different product teams, different roles, working as a full stack developer, web developer, test automation specialist, and even a year as a growth hacking engineer. So I was comfortable coding. And while I was there, I sort of picked up developer advocacy tasks on the side. I didn't know that they were dev advocacy at the time, but I was in our forums answering questions, I was writing tutorials, I was speaking at conferences, and eventually I was like, oh, you know what, this is the right fit for me. So I went on to be a developer advocate at Sugar CRM, and then MongoDB, and now here at Grammarly. So I'm comfortable with technical writing. I've written readmes for code repos. I've written tutorials and articles, but when I write those, I like to inject my personality in them. So you'll see a lot of GIFs, a lot of pop culture. I love the TV show Parks and Rec. So I'm used to writing really fun technical writing. And I knew documentation, I needed to be a little more buttoned up, a little bit more formal. So this was a different style of writing to me. So I had a lot to learn. I was in way over my head, and the blank page problem was way too real. I was just staring there at the blank page with this analysis paralysis, trying to figure out how to describe steps in a way that would be applicable to a wide variety of use cases, because I was used to tutorials with a very specific use case. I went back and forth in my mind about how much detail to provide. I eventually pushed through the discomfort, and with the help of some quality reviewers and the engineering team, I did actually get that documentation published. Now, probably like many of you in this room, I have not yet come to love to write documentation, but with a lot of practice, I've gotten better at it over time. Chances are good you've probably written some sort of documentation in the past, or you're going to be writing some in the future. So I'm going to pause a minute, and I'm going to ask you to get out your devices. And let's see, there's my mouse. We're going to hop over to menti.com. So there's a QR code on the screen that you can navigate to, or you can go directly to menti, menti.com. And it's going to ask you to enter a code. So I'll read that aloud. It is 2176218. So I just want to ask you, what types of documentation are you writing? Or maybe if you've been putting it off, what types of documentation should you be writing? So I've lost my mouse again. Give you some examples just to get you started here. Maybe you're writing official documentation like I was. Maybe you need to write a README for your code repo. Maybe you need to write instructions for how to set up a development environment for your teammates, or how to use your test automation framework, anything like that. So let's see, we've got a nice word cloud being built. What's coming up here? It's moving really fast. We see readmes are really popular, technical, so lots of technical writing. Onboarding instructions, I love that for teammates who are coming on. What else is Java doc? Yes, so important. API documentation. I love it. So it sounds like you've got a lot of different ideas. Does this say not bad? Not bad documentation. It doesn't need to be good, it just needs to be not bad. Thank you for that. So it sounds like you've got a lot of great ideas of the types of documentation that you want to be writing. So I'm going to jump back over to my slides here. We'll get there. So today I'm going to be sharing with you 10 best practices for writing documentation. With every best practice, I'm going to give you a concrete example related to my experience writing documentation. But you all just shared with me lots of examples of how you're writing documentation. So I want you to keep that in mind as I'm sharing the best practices and think about how these best practices apply to your particular use case. So without further ado, let's jump right in to the 10 best practices for writing documentation. First up, read the docs, or read some of the docs. So if you're adding on to an existing set of documentation, start out by reading it. If you can get through all of it in a reasonable amount of time, that's great. Read through it. If you can't, that's fine. Check out the important pieces, like the getting started guide. Maybe there's an overview, maybe there's an introduction, and then find something similar to what you'll be writing. Look for patterns in how the documentation is structured and consider how you can follow that structure in your writing. Familiarize yourself with key terms and the level of detail provided, as you'll want to match these aspects in your new documentation. In many cases, you'll want to aim for your documentation to feel so cohesive that it was written by a single person. If you find something confusing or that could be improved while you're reading, take a note or open a ticket. I mean, if it's a really easy, quick fix, that's fine, but don't get sidetracked into fixing everything right away. But do take notes. It's super important. You're never going to get those fresh eyes again, so make sure you're writing down anything that's confusing. So in my case, I popped open the existing documentation, and I started out by reading those intro pages, so the overview, the getting started guide, and the try it now page. So that gave me that high-level view of how our team was describing concepts. Then I jumped down to the pages specifically about how to use the SDK with particular technologies. The page that I was going to be writing on Electron was probably going to go in this section. So I wanted to familiarize myself with it, see what those common headers, those common sections are, and make sure I was going to use that same structure. Unfortunately, I did not have time to read everything, so I browsed a little bit of the API reference, but not much. I came back to it later. As I read the docs, I took notes on areas for improvement. I actually created a spreadsheet. I love a spreadsheet. And I noted everywhere that I became confused or that terms were used inconsistently. Our docs are actually part of a merge request process. I didn't want to end up with this jumbo merge request, so I just stayed focused on the docs that I needed to write. Now, some of you might be thinking, that's great, but I need to write something brand new. I don't have existing documentation to work from. That's cool. Go find a similar project, do a light read of their documentation, and note what you like and don't like. And that'll give you a little inspiration as you start writing. So, best practice number 1, read some of the docs. Best practice number 2, identify what needs to be documented. And I'm not just talking about that high-level topic like I need to write docs for Electron. I'm talking about all the details underneath. So here are some questions to consider. What concepts do your readers need to understand? Do you need to explain those concepts or link to other resources that explain them? What prerequisites will your readers need to complete before beginning? Do they need to install something? What steps will your readers need to take? These are the details. What will the reader learn or accomplish after reading your documentation? This is your learning objective. This is going to help you stay really focused as you're writing. And finally, what versions of the software does this documentation apply to? Or if, like me, you're documenting how two things work together, What versions of each are supported? Do you need some sort of a version matrix? The details. It's the details. So if you're not already an expert on the details, this is the time to dig in and learn them. Perhaps you do online research. Perhaps you try the steps yourself, or perhaps you ask an expert questions. Maybe you do a combination of all three. Keep notes on things that confuse you or where you get stuck, because chances are if you're getting stuck, your readers will also get stuck. So you're going to want to answer those questions in your docs. And be sure to detail the steps that you're taking as a first-time user, because the experience may be different in subsequent tries. Now, I know some of you sitting in this room, you're already the expert. You've already got it in your head. You're like, I don't need to do any research. So your goal here is to get into the mindset of that first-time reader, that first-time user. Go and try it out in a fresh environment. It's very easy to forget, oh, I installed this thing 6 months ago. It's crucial. So go try everything in a fresh environment. Think about what you know that your reader does not know. Okay, so again, my task was to document how developers can use the SDK with Electron. And I didn't have a lot of time to do online research. It was going out the following week. So I called up our engineering team, did a quick video call with them, and they walked me through the steps. They also were like, hey, Lauren, just so you know that not only do you need to explain the Getting Started guide, but we have this special feature called Connected Accounts. We already have documented steps for it for web apps, but hey, just so you know, there's this extra complicated flow that you're going to need to explain specifically for this use case. So they walked me through that as well. So I really appreciated that they flagged that for me. I asked the engineer a ton of questions, took a lot of notes, and then when we hung up, I actually tried it myself. Admittedly, I did get stuck a few times, but they were really great, and they walked me through it again over Slack. And by the end, I had a detailed list of steps. So, best practice number 2, identify what needs to be documented. Okay, best practice number 3, learn about your reader. Now, if you're lucky, somebody's already done this work for you. Maybe your team has built detailed personas. Or if you're writing internally facing documentation, maybe you know your teammates personally, so you already know what they don't know. Try to answer the following questions about your reader. What is your reader trying to accomplish? What do they already know about the topic? What concepts and terms will be new to them? And how does your reader want to find the information they need? So when I was writing these docs, we didn't have a detailed persona I could work from because we were still in the early beta stages of our product. And it was due to be released the following week. I did not have time to do research, so I made my best guess. So I'll give you examples to answers to these questions. So what was my reader trying to accomplish? Well, they want to add communication assistance to their existing Electron app. I assumed they already had an app up and running, and they just wanted to add the communication assistance to it. What do they already know? I assume they're already familiar with Electron apps. Or if they're not, this is not where they're going to come to find that information. So I did not need to explain the details of Electron to them. What concepts and terms will be new to them? I assumed they didn't know anything about the SDK. And finally, how do they want to find the information that they need? Well, I assume they want really detailed, clear, written steps for how to get started. They want to be able to skim the docs to find what versions of Electron we support. They don't want that buried in the prose. They want that to be a very clear heading. And they also probably want a full working code example in GitHub. So, best practice number 3, learn about your reader. Okay, before I move on to best practice number 4, I'm going to pause here. And I want you to think about your favorite framework or library or programming language or tool. So your favorite piece of technology. Okay? Now I want you to think about their docs. Think about maybe you're visualizing their colors, maybe you're visualizing the navigation, maybe you're visualizing that page that you always reference that you can never remember the details of. Okay, got their docs in your mind? Okay. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you have read that entire set of documentation. Okay. The docs writers love you. There's 2 in the back. Everybody else? 3. Okay, so 3 of us, I don't even know how many there are, whatever percentage that is, have not read the docs for our favorite technology, right? And that's pretty typical. Most of us are not going to read the docs from top to bottom. So write so your docs are skimmable. People are going to rarely read the entire set of documentation from start to finish. Instead, they're going to go to Google, see if they've got a page. Maybe that's not quite it. They're going to go to a different page. Maybe they're going to Control F in the table of contents in that navigation bar. They're going to use search. They're going to jump around. They're going to look for the heading. Is this right? Maybe not. Maybe this heading is right, and I'm going to read it, and I'm going to find the information I need. So it's really important to write so your docs are skimmable. So here are 2 pages of documentation that contain the exact same information. I've just formatted it differently. So show of hands, I'm going to ask you which one's your favorite. So how many prefer this one on the left? How many prefer this one on the right? Yeah, y'all played my game, thank you. Okay, so we want to write so our docs are skimmable. I'm curious, is anybody comfortable shouting out, what do you like better about this one? Yeah. Titles, yes, the headings. Bullet points. Structure, yeah. I didn't hear it back here. The highlighting, yeah, so the note jumps out, exactly. Anything else? Louder? More parts that are brief, yes. Yeah. The spacing, yes. Okay, you guys identified everything that was on my list, right? So we like this format. Same content, but it's skimmable, right? It's easier to find the information. So here are some tips for writing so your docs are skimmable. Use descriptive headers that allow your reader to quickly determine if a section will provide the information they're looking for. So there are lots of different benefits here. First, like we just saw, it helps for visually skimming. When you use HTML header tags, it is also easier for those who are skimming with screen readers because they can jump from heading to heading. Also, if you use the HTML ID tags in those headers, it's easier for you to link to a particular section. So this is really nice if somebody's like, oh, can you help me do this? And you can say, oh, it's this section on this long page. So your support team loves this as well. Write in short paragraphs focused on a single idea. Long paragraphs are just harder to parse, so write in short paragraphs. Short paragraphs are also easier for translators, so it's easier to internationalize your docs, which is always great. Use bulleted list to share groups of information. We just saw that on the previous example. It was much easier to parse those bullets than the paragraph. And then use numbered lists to share sequential or ordered information. Numbered lists are exceptionally helpful in tutorials when you want people to follow step by step. I will warn you, you don't want a 30-long ordered list though, right? You want to break it up into shorter sections. People are going to lose their spot in a big numbered list, but also if somebody's just jumping and they want to know, how do I do this one thing in this big long tutorial? Having that header is going to really help, so break up your lists. So in summary, write so your docs are skimmable. Okay, best practice number 5, read the style guide or select one. Have you ever wasted time debating with a teammate in a pull request about the formatting that should be used? It can be pretty painful, right? So just like a development team creates code formatting guidelines, your team can create a style guide for your documentation. So a style guide is a document that provides rules and guidelines for consistent writing. When you write documentation, you need to make a number of decisions, and the answer is not always clearly right or wrong. It can come down to preferences. So a style guide could cover topics like tone and formality level. Are you casual? Are you formal? Are you somewhere in between? Grammar and formatting guidelines. Most important to me, do you use the Oxford comma? I don't know if y'all are opinionated on that. I'm very opinionated. The ideal reading level. So I've heard some general guidelines. You probably don't want to write above the 8th grade reading level. Keep in mind, English may not be the first language of the people who are reading your docs, so you want to make sure that they're very easy to understand. Inclusive language guidelines and words to avoid. You don't want to cause harm to anyone or distract your readers from your message, so use inclusive language. How to talk about important terms and actions. We'll come back to terms later, but maybe there are particular verbs you use to describe actions that your readers or the technology is taking, so make sure to note those. And finally, what use cases or themes to use for example. So perhaps you have a running theme throughout your docs, like a pet shop example, and you want to be consistent throughout. If your team already has a style guide, take the time to familiarize yourself with it and reference it when you have questions. If not, there are so many great technical style guides online. This is the Twilio style guide. So start with that, and if you make a style guide decision that differs from or enhances a style guide that you've chosen, document the decision in a place like a team wiki or a file in your code repo. Now, I'm a Grammarly employee, and so at Grammarly we use our products. So we actually take this a step further, and we use the Grammarly style guide feature. And it's like the difference between having code formatting rules in a wiki page and having code formatting rules in a linter that's part of your CI/CD process that enforces it. So what we do is we've codified our style guide, and so whenever I use Grammarly to analyze my writing, it'll say, hey, the Grammarly style guide has flagged this. In this example, we're saying, please use the term San Francisco hub instead of San Francisco office. This is admittedly a very nitpicky small example, okay? But we have a lot of these rules, and what that means is that whenever any of us are writing, anywhere we're writing, we're going to be consistent. That's going to give us consistency for our readers and also give us a strong brand tone. So that's how we take care of our style guide. Okay, best practice number 6, build code samples. A clear code sample is worth 1,000 words. I'm guessing if you're sitting in this room, you've probably skimmed documentation looking for a code sample, right? You go in, you find your code sample, you copy, you don't even read the prose around it. You're just like, I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste it in, and I'm going to see if it works, right? And you hope that it works. This is totally normal, it happens all the time. So here are some recommendations for building code samples. Write just enough code to demonstrate the concept you're describing. You want your code samples to be clear and concise. Don't try to pile too much in them. Ensure the code sample conforms to the best practices of the programming language being used. Make sure it's idiomatic, right? You want Python to feel like Python. You want Java to feel like Java. Optimize for readability over code efficiency or really anything else. You come to the conference, you learn the fancy new syntax. This is not the place to show it off. You want to make sure that your code is readable. If everybody doesn't know the syntax, don't throw it in. Note any prerequisites that are needed in order for the code to run. For example, some of you might forget to include imports that go at the top of the file. You might forget to include that someone needs to install something, so just make sure you've noted any prerequisites. Note if the sample includes code that you do not recommend for production. Ideally, you're only going to include production-ready code. It's not always possible. If that's the case, make sure it's super obvious, because again, we're all going to come in and just copy and paste your code sample. So looking at our docs, many of our docs include embedded code snippets, and we've got them formatted in dark mode so that they really pop on the page. Many of the docs pages also include links to code sandbox environments. And these environments run code that we store in GitHub. So a reader can come in, they can pull it up on GitHub and clone it, grab their own copy. Or if they don't want to install anything, get hung up on the setup, they can just run it in Code Sandbox. So on the left side of the screen, you can see the code. You can come in and tinker with it, adjust it. And then on the right side, you can see the preview. So best practice number 6, build code samples. Best practice number 7, review your work. It's almost certain that your first draft will have room for improvement. You might skip a key step that leaves your readers feeling frustrated or confused. Or you might have grammar mistakes or wordy sentences that distract or confuse your readers. So get some feedback. Similar to code reviews, documentation reviews improve quality and spread knowledge across team members. So create a docs review process that makes sense for your project. If you're writing internal documentation for something like setting up a dev environment, perhaps you post it in a team wiki and ask the person who tries it to give you feedback or update it themselves. If you're writing public documentation, you're going to likely want a more robust review process. But no matter what else your review process looks like, always do a self-review. Wait at least a day after you've finished your draft before doing your self-review. This is going to help mistakes pop out at you more. Read through your docs from top to bottom to make sure they make sense. If you're writing a guide with steps, try it in a fresh environment. I've said fresh environment so many times today, but it's so important. It's important. Fresh environment. Okay, that's my key phrase today. You may want to run it through a spell checker, a communication assistant. Make sure your writing is clear and polished. And then step through any checklists that your reviewers are going to use. You want to make it as easy for your reviewers to give you a review as possible. I'm very much a detailed person. I know some people are higher level first and then move to the details. I start in the details. And if I'm reviewing somebody else's work and the writing's hard to follow, I'm getting stuck on the steps, it's very hard for me to take a step back and say, is this really the doc we want? Is this going to help our readers? So make sure you do a self-review, get it in the best possible shape that you can before sending it out to someone else. So on our team, we have 3 layers of reviews. We start with a self-review. After that's complete, we request a technical review. This could go through a few different cycles. And then after the technical review is complete, we request a copy review. Now, I love a review checklist to keep reviews consistent and to make sure that nothing important gets skipped. So here are the checklists we use. I'm not going to read through them, but feel free to take a picture and then you can modify them for your review process. The QR code on the screen is also going to take you to a blog post I wrote, and that blog post includes these checklists if you want to copy and paste them. All right, I see cameras still up. I'm going to have a QR code at the end, so I'm going to keep moving. Best practice number 8, determine your tolerance for outdated documentation. Change is inevitable. Whatever you're documenting is likely to change, and your documentation is probably going to become outdated or inaccurate at some point. Highly motivated readers might push through broken documentation and figure it out themselves, but unmotivated readers might simply give up when something doesn't work. So consider your readers' expectations and the time you have to devote to building and maintaining the documentation. In some cases, you might have a really high tolerance for outdated documentation. You might just say, hey, if you see a mistake, update it yourself or contact me. In other cases, you might have a really low tolerance for outdated documentation. Like a getting started guide that doesn't work could have a massively negative impact on your users. So let me give you some examples of ways to handle outdated documentation, and you can build a process that makes sense for you. So first up, you can provide one-on-one help. So just say, hey, if something's broken, contact me directly, and I'm going to help you out. This is super effective, but as you can imagine, does not scale well. You can make your docs editable and provide contribution guidelines so that readers can make updates to the docs themselves. You can add a survey widget to your docs that allow readers to report issues. So this is something we do. At the bottom of every docs page, we have a survey widget. You can select 1 to 5 stars, and then you can also input a comment. So we know right away if something's broken. You can provide a discussion forum where readers can ask questions. This is another thing we do. We have a GitHub repo, so we've just turned on the discussions feature so people can come in and ask us questions, and they can also report issues. I really like this approach for 2 reasons. So it kind of sucks for the first person who finds the issue because they have to wait. But anybody after that can find the issue for themselves right away. They can find the answer for themselves right away. It also allows us to easily step back periodically and say, is there something wrong with our product that we need to fix? Or, is there something wrong with our documentation we need to fix? So we can look for patterns there. Another thing you can do is include documentation updates in the merge checklist for whatever is documented. So this is something we do. We consider documentation to be part of the done criteria for a feature to be released. So we now have a developer educator who owns the product documentation, and he's in the engineering team's daily stand-ups. Because even though our engineering team starts with a sprint plan, things change, they make decisions, okay, we're not gonna follow the designs, or, oh, we found a bug, we're gonna tweak this over here. And so he's always listening to that, so he knows, okay, we need to update the documentation based on these changes. And finally, you can write automated tests for your documentation steps, so you'll know right away if something breaks. So talk with your teammates and come to a consensus about your tolerance for outdated documentation and build a process around that. So best practice number 8, determine your tolerance for outdated documentation. Number 9, future-proof your visuals. So as I just mentioned, whatever you're documenting is likely to change. And this is going to inevitably lead to a maintenance cost in the docs. So how can you future-proof your visuals and minimize the maintenance cost? Well, one of the easiest things you can do is minimize the number of screenshots and videos in your docs. And I know, they can be super helpful. But user interfaces typically change. I mean, that's why we have the fewest number of UI tests, right? It changes frequently. So the cost of updating screenshots is higher than the cost of updating plain text, and the cost of updating video is even higher. So before including an image or a video, consider if its value outweighs the maintenance cost. When I first started writing tutorials, I wanted to include a screenshot for every step. I was like, yeah, this is going to make this the most clear. You probably don't need to do that. Maybe you just need a screenshot at the very end. Or maybe there's a place where everybody gets stuck and they don't know where to look for something. That's a great place to include a screenshot. When possible, use abstract illustrations that are not tied directly to the product UI. So for example, we display this animation on our user feedback page. So it illustrates the concept of user feedback, but it does not show the menu options that led to that survey. So this animation is going to remain relevant even if our menus change. Now, sometimes a screenshot really is the best way to enhance your text description. So in those cases, you can minimize the amount of the user interface that's included in the screenshot. So if I were going to write about the dashboard, I might be tempted to include this full screenshot, right? But maybe I don't need it. Maybe I just need a screenshot of the monitoring widget. So you could cut out the side and cut out the top, and that way if anything in those nav bars change, this screenshot is still relevant. So best practice number 9, future-proof your visuals. All right, y'all, we've made it. Best practice number 10, document decisions. As you're writing, you're probably going to find yourself waffling about something. You might waffle about a term, you might waffle about the verb you use to describe an action that your user is taking, or you might waffle about how much of the screen to include in a screenshot. You might waffle by yourself, or you might waffle by a teammate. Eventually, hopefully, you'll be done waffling and you'll make a decision. So whenever you make a decision, write it down. Or in other words, document your documentation decisions. Put it in your style guide. You can always change your mind later, but until then, you and your teammates can consistently follow that decision. Use the same word for the same thing every time. Synonyms are not your friend. If you use 2 different but similar words, readers are going to wonder if you're talking about the same thing. So I recommend creating a glossary of key terms and definitions. Whenever you introduce a new concept, drop it in your glossary. Now, the glossary could live publicly somewhere in your documentation or privately in your style guide. Now, I have found selecting terms is difficult, so I'm not going to minimize that. But a lot of times, selecting a term is a lot easier than getting that perfectly crafted, wordsmithed definition. So if you're going to be tempted to debate and evaluate and perfect that definition, just keep an internal glossary somewhere. Pick your term, and then just drop a messy definition in there. Be like, it's kind of like this, or it's this other word that we sometimes use. Like, it's totally fine. It can be a messy definition. Perfecting the definition does not need to be your top priority. The important thing is to pick a term and use it consistently. So when I started working on our docs, we had a terms list in our style guide. Whenever we made a decision about our term, we added it to that list. And eventually, that list was used as the basis for an official glossary in our docs. So best practice number 10, document decisions. Okay, so let's recap. Here we go. Read some of the docs. Identify what needs to be documented, and not just that high-level topic, get all into the details. Learn about your reader. What do they want to accomplish? Keep that in mind as you're writing. Write so your docs are skimmable. So we talked about the importance of headings, short paragraphs, and lists. Read the style guide or select one. Build code samples. Make sure they're clear and concise. Review your work. No matter what, always do a self-review. Determine your tolerance for outdated documentation and then build your process around that. Future-proof your visuals, and then document your documentation decisions. Like any skill, writing documentation is difficult at first. Yesterday in the opening keynote, Dom was talking about us all being imposters. I mean, I totally felt that the first time that I was writing documentation. I was like, oh my gosh, right? It's going to become easier the more you practice. So don't fret if you find yourself staring at the blank page, wondering how to begin. Find a place to start. It doesn't need to be the beginning. In fact, don't start at the beginning. Don't start with that intro paragraph. Start with the meat. Get it documented, and then go back and write your intro. The first draft does not need to be anywhere close to perfect. All right, I'm going to ask you to pull your devices back out, and I'm wondering which best practice resonated with you. Which one do you want to try over the next 2 weeks? So we're going to go back to that same Menti survey, if I can get there. If you left your screen open, it's the same code, or you can use the QR code and go to menti.com, M-E-N-T-I. And I've heard you may have to click next to go to the next question if you're still stuck on the first one. So which best practice will you try? What resonated with you? And if you need the code, it's 2176218. It looks like the votes are coming in, but we've got a pretty clear winner here, right? So your docs are skimmable. I love that. So I'm going to encourage you to, while you're on your devices, jump to 2 weeks from now in your calendar and set a reminder and say, have I taken the chance to write so my docs are skimmable? Have I been implementing this? Try and follow through. Let me know how it goes. I would love to hear from you. So you can find me on both Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm also on TikTok. I've not been active in a while, but you can find me there as well. So my QR code with a link to all of my social media handles is on the screen. And I have a link to a copy of the slides as well from that link tree. Also, I've written an article where I cover these exact same best practices, so feel free to reference it, and I would love for you to share it with anyone who you think would find it valuable. So QR code's on the screen. Both of those QR codes are now here, as well as the best practices. I'm sure you've been hearing it all day yesterday, but please do fill out the session survey. I would love to hear what you liked, what resonated with you. My manager would love to hear that as well. And I would also love to hear how to improve so I can make this session better in the future. So thank you so much for coming. And with that, I think we will open the floor for questions. Do we have questions? Mike, we're on it. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yeah. We'll pause for the microphone.
Hi. I use Grammarly for writing as well, writing tag documentation, and one of your suggestions was avoid synonyms. Grammarly constantly suggests synonyms
It
to
does.
me. How can I stop Grammarly from doing that?
That is a great question. I have also suggested this to our team and said we need like a tech writing mode because yes, that is something that also drives me crazy. So I'm going to make a note that I'm not the only one requesting that, and I will request it again. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the nice talk. I have one question about visual and text. What should be the proportion of visual and text? Because visuals are very easy to follow.
I don't know that I don't have a hard rule for you. I would say probably 1 to 2 visuals per page is a rough guideline. I would say it really comes down to where people are getting stuck. It's really nice to have one at the end. If it's a tutorial, it's great to have one at the end. This is what you should have accomplished. This is what it should look like. If there's a place where nobody can find the button, they can't figure, they're getting stuck. That's a great place. So 1 to 2, but it's definitely not a hard rule. I think it's trial and error.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So, I think you talked about how to find your documentation. So if a documentation can't be found, is as good as not having the documentation. So how can we find a documentation easily?
That's a great question. What kind of is it product documentation? What type of documentation are you?
Yeah, usage, design, architecture, you name it.
Yeah, so is it internal or external documentation?
Mostly internal.
Internal. Yeah, very, very good question. I know the wiki pages tend to just kind of explode. I know on our team, we use a tool called Glean that helps us. It's a great search tool that helps us search our wikis. And some of it is letting people know. So I'm a big fan of internal self-promotion, and let people know what you're building. Let people know what you're talking about. That's going to be great for them because they're going to be able to use the resource. It's also great for you because it helps you become known in the company. So I would say the 2 pieces are get a great search tool at your company, let people know, and then let people know about it. Advocate for yourself, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll hit a question here and then we'll run to the back.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. I think in number 8, determine your tolerance for outdated documentation, you mentioned something about test automation. What does that look like? Is that test automation for the code samples, or is it test automation for the docs themselves? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'm going to be upfront with you. I've not done it personally, but when I was at MongoDB, our docs team, we had a full-time docs team that was amazing, and they did this. And they had a tool that I do not recall the name of that they built, and any code sample that they had was pulled from their code repository. So they had it would say pull it from this code repository, here's the steps. And they'd have a full code file with all the steps, and so everything would compile, it would all work. And then they would say, we need lines 3 through 5 right here in this documentation page. And that way they could write all their automated tests for it, and it was great.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Can we run to the back? He's had his hand up. Thank you.
My question might be a partial answer to the question, the one before, and I'm curious about your thoughts about that. I'm involved in several documentation and websites which are written by open source teams, loosely coupled teams with no boss, no clear strategy. And the challenge that I see is the navigation. everybody has their own view. One wants to organize the navigation according to the system shape. Other ones wants to organize it according to the user's level and stuff. And I find that tagging and tag-based navigation is super helpful for that, because we can usually agree on which tags to set on the page. And even, and this then gives multiple angles for navigation. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a solid answer for you. I think it comes down to whatever makes the most sense for your users. And to be honest, the first piece of documentation that I wrote, I now hate. I don't like the way I organized it. And we evolve, we refactor. So I think I don't have a solid answer for your question, but I think you try it and you see what works, and then you say, oh, we could make it better this way.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, thanks for the talk. One of the, I can't recall the name of the author of the blog post, but they established 4 key archetypes of documentation, 3 of which I can remember, like how-tos, tutorials, reference guides, one other. So I imagine for non-expert documentation writers, they're a good start. Do you recommend starting with an archetype, or literally starting from scratch every time?
No, I think that's a great idea. Start from an archetype. Figure out start with what does my reader want to accomplish? How do they want to find it? And then, start with a known structure.
Thanks for the great talk. Really love this. So I'm faced with a multitude of open source projects we maintain, and we have a reference documentation attached to that, which works for the open source stuff, but also for some of the paid things.
Can you hold the microphone real quick?
Yeah, sorry. So what you said, that part of the definition of done, essentially, with the review process, is that somebody actually checks when there are code changes, that the documentation is also changed. Doesn't that go wrong often? Isn't that missed?
It's part of our process, so
It just works out.
it works, and we're very involved. I mean, we're very involved, so we're making sure it happens. I've heard, I read, I'm not part of the Kubernetes team, but I've heard that they have that same requirement as well. So I'm curious. It's probably very similar to maybe what you're talking about.
Yeah, so the direction we're going, so we right now have a separate repository for our guides, and we are thinking of just not doing that anymore and moving the guides into a distinct folder inside the project. And I have a separate project that merge all of that, so that it's going to be part of the pull requests in essence, so that we can force that a bit better. But I'm not entirely sold yet on the idea, because it means your pull requests get a lot bigger with a lot of documentation in it as well. But
Yeah, if it's part of your checklist, it's a great reminder. Yeah.
all right.
And I will say, it's separate. It's not the same merge request in ours, so it's separate merges, but it doesn't get released until we've got the docs ready. Let's see, we've got 3 minutes left. Okay.
Hi, how do you coordinate releases between documentation releases and code releases if you need them to keep in step?
So we're a very small, a relatively small team. We've got maybe about 10 engineers and then 2 docs writers, and so we stay in step. We're in each other's stand-ups, and so we're very aware. And then we do a last call before the release. Hey, is anybody? It goes through Slack. Is anybody ready for the release? Here's what's going out, and we're just. It's great because the engineers know, so they are aware, and it's important to them that we keep them in step. Yeah. Cool. All right, with that, I think we will wrap up. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to grab me here or later in the day. I appreciate y'all coming. Have a great rest of your day, Thursday.